my screen is what we talked about last time, where we went over the information in the Sonic repo and the BFD ECMP information here. And so did anyone have PRs or anything they wanted to cover today? Or Guohan?
So I saw is today we're going to talk about the
Metadata?
yeah. Or
Let me go back up. And so I think that was Sanjay and Vijay. Did you want to cover the metadata that we talked about last time, pulling that forward?
Hey, yeah, I think we're just checking if Sanjay is going to
Okay.
join. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Thanks. Thanks. And I'll find the PR. Let me stop sharing real quick. Okay, well, while we're waiting for Vijay and Sanjay, did you guys have other PRs we needed to look at, or do we need to check the queue?
Hey, Christina. So it might
Yeah,
take a few minutes for Sanjay to join, so we
okay.
can discuss other items if anything else is there.
Okay, it didn't sound like there was a ton else, so we'll go ahead and wait, I suppose. I'll see, I'll take a quick second and see if James wants to join as well. He mentioned something about it this morning. I'm gonna go on mute real quick. Okay, I'm back.
So I don't know if that part is clarified in the document or not. I remember, you know, when we're doing this, you know, the data plan sync, you know, I remember there were some, you know, config version, and you know, if only the config version has been updated, then will trigger some kind of resync, right? So I don't know if this part has been documented in the designs or not.
Hey, Guohan. It's Sanjay.
Sunday.
Hey,
Yeah.
Krishna. Yeah, it is documented. I think in the interaction between this thing and that section, it's there. Go on.
Oh,
There's a thing about while we are doing bulk sync, what are the things that trigger incremental sync?
let me check.
And can you remind me of the issue of the PR again while we're talking?
Actually, if you go to the open no, not even the PR. If you go to the actual document, Christina, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. The AJ overview or
No, the proposal.
down to the bulk sync?
Yeah, there's some interaction. I think if you look for interaction, something like that. Just below that, data path synchronization. After that, there is a section on interaction. Yeah. Check this, go on. I think we have this thing on what happens if there is a conflict change. Hey, go on. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm just looking through it. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Uh, um. So this is the case where we handle during the bulk sync, then there is still configuration change being pushed, and how to handle those cases.
Yeah. So I think there are two cases. I think in the bulk sync itself, when there is a config sync that happens, right? You could the flow which is the flow on any of the flow that is being affected could have been already synced over or may not have been synced, right? It may still be in the snapshot, but we haven't reached that point yet, right? We haven't gone through this thing yet. So there is a differentiation of a completely new flow. There are three cases. There's a completely new flow. There is a flow that was there in the bulk sync snapshot. Inside that, there are two cases, sub cases. One is there is a policy change, but the flow was already synced over. I think the bulk sync window has moved past that point. And there is a third subcase, I mean, the second subcase where it is in the bulk sync window, but we have not synced it over yet, right, to the other side. There are three cases, different ways to handle them, but all three cases need to be.
So maybe the question, I don't know if we have been asked, right? So the bulk sync is not happening all the time, right? So it's only, you know, before you switch over or bring up, you know, try to
Correct.
bring up your backup node, right? So
Mhm.
Why in that case, we cannot block the configuration change? I mean, how long is that boxing? I think usually like a few minutes, right? So why in
Yeah,
that
yeah.
case we cannot block the configuration change so that we don't have this problem, and only after the boxing is done, then we do the configuration change.
Yeah, yeah, correct. Good question. Actually, that was our initial this thing too. And I think from Microsoft, from the VNet team, it was a no-go to block the config during the bulk sync. I think the tie-in was not needed. It was a requirement given from the VNet team. Balki was there in the meeting. I was not there in that. Maybe you can elaborate if it's there. But it was initially we also had the same question: whether can we simplify it by not allowing configuration change during bulk sync. But it was a no-go.
Is this something you want Jay to chase down, Guohan? He's on the call from the
Who's
SDN team.
Jay?
Jay Park?
Where's I don't.
Yeah, I'm Jay from VNet team, but I was not in the discussion of this, so I don't have.
But maybe
Currently,
you
I
could
don't
look
have a
into it.
context here.
Yeah, but maybe you could look into it if Guohan has questions.
Yeah, if you have question, you can always ask me. I can redirect to our team.
So how long is that boxing?
About
Usually.
that much time. Yeah, about a couple of minutes, somewhere in the few minutes range. Go on. I think this thing I got was 90 seconds, one of the tests, but somewhere in that range. You can think a few minutes, minute to a couple of minutes to a few minutes. Of course, it will depend on
What's
number
the
of flows.
reason that the control plan has to inject some flow during that boxing? This is mainly on the configuration change, right? So not on the.
There could be clients which are initiating flows. Is that what you meant? There might
Yeah,
be
no, I mean the
network traffic created.
client is initiating flows that that I mean, we're mainly talking about the configuration change during the bulk sync, and that's the reason we have this special handling, right? So I'm trying to understand, like, is this really about the configuration change, or this is not? This is also about the flow creation, those things. I mean, flow creation.
Mhm. All three. I think it could be network driven. It could be administrative flow configuration driven. I think the net idea is you can't freeze. The network might still be, the clients might be sending traffic, they might be sending fins, there might be change in the flow itself, and there might be flow modifications due to policy change. Both cases.
I mean, I totally understand the flow creation, deletion that part from the client side. We cannot block it, right? So, but I think the
Right.
configuration change, I'm not quite sure, you know, or maybe we put it this way, right? So, what are the mechanisms that we need, for the um, flow triggered changes, and what are the things that we needed for the configuration driven changes, right? Can we separate them? Is there any mechanism? Let's say we had this assumption that the configuration will not be changed during that bulk sync, but flow can still come in. So if we if we have that assumption, is this a color thing still needed or no?
You might still need it. The reason is the same three, right? So I think let's abstract out and say there is a change in the flow. We'll ignore how it came, right? Whether it's to policy or through network event. Now, if there is a change in the flow, the flow could be of three classes, right? One is it was a completely new flow, which was not existing when we started bulk sync, right? So it does not exist in the bulk sync snapshot at all, right?
Mhm.
That is one class. The second class is the other side. On the it could have exist. I mean, it was existing when we started the bulk sync. So it's in that second class. In that second class, there are two sub this thing. So now the bulk sync over that minute or how much ever time we are taking, the window is moving, right? It's like a cursor that is in a way, in a crude way. I'm just saying there's a cursor that's
Mhm,
moving
mhm,
and
mhm,
syncing flows. Now the flow that got affected could be on the left side of the cursor or on the right side of the cursor.
mhm.
Right, so that is the second subclass. I think all three cases now, irrespective of whether the change happened via policy or via network event, it in the end it boils down to there is a flow, there is a change in the flow state which needs to be synced, and that flow could potentially be in these three classes. I think it might still be this thing.
But the you because during the bulk sync we still have the data plan sync, right? So for whatever the flow changes, for example, new flow being set up, it still go to the data path sync, right? So
Correct, correct.
why is that? Because that would
Ah,
guarantee the flow being created on this backup. So
correct,
why
correct.
is it necessary for us to still have that
Differentiate.
flow to go over the the bulk sync channel, the gRPC channel?
Correct. So I think this thing is this go on. For example, if it is if the first class, right, class one kind of a thing where it did not exist at all,
Yeah.
right? Then the implementation, like you said, the data path sync can take care of it completely. Right? We don't even need the
Okay.
bulk sync at all. It's not even there in the snapshot. So the data path is not going to, I mean, the bulk sync is not going to sync it. It was not there in that snapshot. So I think this one falls under the category where it is in a different quote unquote color, right? So that snapshot was designated by that color. So it's in a different color. So it gets synced by data path directly, right? Now, if it falls in the second class, now the implementation
So
has
what is
multiple ways of
what
solving.
sorry, what is the second class?
Second class is it was an existing flow which had the color of the bulk sync when bulk sync started. So it's not a completely new flow. So let's say at T0 we started bulk sync and we go on, I mean at T0. If the flow was created after T0, it's a fresh flow, right? Then the data path sync can handle it completely. There's no need for the bulk sync to get involved at all. That's why we do the data path sync while the bulk sync is going on, right? So that all those flows can get synchronized.
Uh-huh.
Now, there could be a flow which was T-1, which existed before T0. We started flow bulk sync at T0. Now at so now bulk sync is responsible for syncing it, right? I mean, bulk sync is going to go through that flow, find that flow, and sync it across to the other side. Now, while we are the bulk sync is parsing and then going through, right? You can come up with a state where at T1 we have done with about 60% say of the flows, right? Now that flow that got affected could be within that 60% that's already synced, or it
Yeah.
could be in that 40% that is not synced yet, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah, yeah.
implementation may choose how you want to do. Now, if you just allow the data path sync to go through, you need to handle, it's possible. I mean, depends on the implementation, right? How you want to take care of it. But in the hardware, when you are inserting, you should make sure that there is no race conditions between what comes, because the bulk sync, the flow that we are talking about might be in flight already in the bulk sync, right? It's not synced to the other side, but it might be in flight, or we are just picking up its states in memory on the sender side or on the receiver side, etc. So, right. So now, if you have two channels coming in from the data path and also from the from the data path sync and also from the bulk sync, I think we just need to make sure that the implementation handles the race condition, right? You don't overwrite one from the other. We don't want the new flow to have been inserted and then the bulk sync comes and overwrites it back to the old state. Right? We just want to make sure of that. In how we do it, this is the case that needs to be handled so that we don't break the consistency of the flow.
But for the flow deletion, right? So if we don't have the bulk sync, the theme packet will go to the other side and also deleting the flow on the other side, right? So
Correct.
I guess
If
what
that
you're saying is that, okay, so, if the theme packet goes first, the data plan packet goes first, data sync goes first, then it will delete uh, the flow on the standby side. But however, um, during that moment we have the bulk sync as well. Then bulk sync may be a little bit delayed, so therefore it will say, okay, because
insert, yeah,
I have the previous snapshot, so I'll put this flow, you know, uh, in the
back, yeah, reinsert
in
it.
the standby, right? So,
Correct, correct. Could reinsert it back. Then you'd go out of sync.
but this is a, but then how do we address this challenge? I guess the bulk sync snapshot is different. The timing is different from the data passing. How do we address this kind of challenge? Using the color to address these challenges, so we know, what is the version, or how do we address that challenges here?
Yeah, so I think it might become very, I mean, it might be in the implementation itself on how we keep the flow, etc. You could mark in the flow whether it's been synchronized and act back from the bulk sync channel. If it is marked in some way in the flow, then data path, in the data path, you could know that, okay, this has not been synced across. So I will let the bulk sync handle it. So you know that it is in that class 2B. But if it is marked already, that we know that bulk sync has already handled this flow, then we could say that data path sync will go ahead and sync this across to the other side. But I guess, yeah, it's one way of doing it, but could be multiple ways of doing it.
I'm not sure I completely understand, right? So if let's say, if we want to handle a flow deletion and the data path sync goes first, they delete the flow in the backup. But in this case, the flow doesn't have any state now, right? So then, we have this bulk sync. You try to add this flow. So what is the bulk sync here is trying to compare? Because there's no other record saying, okay, this flow has been deleted before, so we should not create it again. So how does this? I'm trying to understand, how does this work here? Because you are saying, we mark it as a deletion, but we,
Now
we are
that's
not
one way.
really okay.
Yeah, no. What I said was if you have it, not for deletion per se. So there are multiple ways to go on. I mean, again, we should leave it to the implementation. One way is in the flow, you say it's not about mark for deletion or not. You say, yeah, you could mark for deletion, and you could also say whether bulk sync has processed it or not processed it. Right. So you remember that cursor that I was saying, whether where the bulk sync cursor is moving, already processed, not processed, right? So you could say whether the cursor is past that flow or not yet past that flow. Once you know that, if the cursor is passed already and bulk sync has already synced to the standby side, then it is safe to sync whatever from data path, right? You can do it all incremental sync because we are past that point. You could start syncing it. But on the if it is not at sync, right? If it is cursor is still on, you're on the right side of the cursor, then the data path syncing would actually create trouble, right? Because data path has the bulk sync has not yet synced to the standby. Then you have to suppress. If you're following this methodology, you would need to suppress the data path from syncing the flow, and say that the bulk sync will come through and handle the flow when syncing the flow. If that is the case, you would need to mark it for delete. You know that this is already deleted, right? So you can clean up. Or if there is a change, delete is one case. It could be delete, or it could even be something might have changed in the flow itself, right? Whatever the state of the flow might have changed. Depending on that, you could handle it appropriately.
So one way to look at it, Sanjay, is that you will need to do kind of multiple passes on the data path flow sync,
Potentially, correct,
right?
correct.
Potentially, right? That way,
Yeah.
eventual consistency is achieved.
Maybe exactly. You might be in sync, but during that bulk sync, there might be during that interval, the active and the standby, there is this thing. But once bulk sync completes and you have done, you'll have once the multiple passes have passed, you'll have actually achieved consistency. That is one way. Second way is you could do multiple passes, or you could have on the standby itself, if you had some way to distinguish what is before and what is after. You could let the data path sync go through, and then when the bulk sync comes in, you know whether it was after or before. So you could either drop it or actually update the data path. You could do that way too. There are multiple ways. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Uh, Theoretically, let's say there is a timestamp on the flow sync on when the flow was updated. You could blindly sync if the implementation chooses to do so. You could actually sync the flow blindly to the other side. And on the standby, you kind of arbitrate to see whether the what came from data path sync and what came from bulk sync. If the bulk sync was newer in that quote unquote timestamp or whatever is that this thing, you would push that, you would accept the thing from the bulk sync. But if the bulk sync timestamp was older, you could ignore it, right? You could drop it, or the same way the other way around.
Yeah.
You could do
Yeah,
that.
use
Multiple ways.
timestamp, versioning, you have, multiple ways to kind of resolve that.
Correct.
Ordering issues here, yeah.
Yeah. But I guess the key is there are these cases that needs to be handled. I think the implementation has to kind of keep this in mind. I think that's what we're.
But I guess, in terms of side API, do we have those necessary attribute to allow this happen? For example, I think, there was some mention about the timestamp. We compare the timestamp, and there is a cursor. I don't know, like we have this cursor defined in the side API so that both sides will know the progress. I mean, sorry, basically the standby side will know the progress, which has been synced, which hasn't been synced. So when I receive a flow, I know whether this falls part of the left of the cursor or right of the cursor. So, and
It's a great question.
Yeah, I think this should be in the. I think it's an implementation specific thing, Guohan. Depends, right? The implementation, for example, you could implement it using this cursor, or you could use it using the timestamp, or maybe I think this is what we are coming up now. There might be other, depending on the hardware and this thing, other implementations may find something else that is more conducive to those implementations, right? It's a so there is an option in this thing. We have the vendor metadata. You could put in, for example, the timestamp in that vendor metadata, and hypothetically, right? You could put the timestamp in that vendor metadata when we sync the flow. So along with this metadata, there is also the vendor specific metadata.
so
You could put it in that.
Yeah, I think the problem for me is that I think you mentioned this implementation specific things a few times, right? So, but the problem for me is that I'm going to implement this things, in the syncd for the bulk sync, right? So, but however, if I don't know if the side spec is complete, then how do I address those those edge cases?
This we don't need in the site configuration, right? In the site, it's not needed.
No, but
I didn't get why do we need this cursor or this thing in the SI interface?
For example, the with the side API we get the bulk sync, right? So we get the on one side, on the active side we get all the data, and we use gRPC to transfer it to the standby side, right? So then meanwhile the data path sync is in place, right? So then how do I resolve those those conflict? No, okay, I have to do a second pass, or that kind of things, right? So
so that is being, I think that's this thing. So I think from the side, what the SAI tells the data path is start data path sync, right? I mean, start bulk sync. And then once the implementation is done with the bulk sync, however it chooses to do it, right? Whether, however it tries to the cursor or the time, whatever, however is the chosen method for the hardware friendly implementation. The implementation finishes that. And once it is done, there is a notification that comes from the DPU, from the SAI-SD, the implementation that says bulk sync is done. So that way the state machine that is running knows that bulk sync is done. That way the state machine does not need to intimately know the exact mechanism that is happening in each implementation, because each implementation may be different depending on how it needs to optimize. But it will get a notification. It is driven by the state machine running on Sonic via this. I think you will say start bulk sync and get a notification back from the implementation when the bulk sync is done, right? And the proposal is leave it to the implementation to actually coordinate the bulk sync and do it in the sequence, whatever is friendly to the hardware.
Okay. I mean, this bulk sync and data path sync, you have two ways to sequence flow. I think it's a generic problem. Basically when you take a snapshot and you do the changes, and then, meanwhile the changes still happens, it's a generic problem, right? So I'm saying that, since it's a generic problem, then why don't we, work out the details to see, how do we address it in a as a community in a uniform way, right? Um, so maybe I think, um, maybe you know, I'm not sure I completely agree with with the approach that we're handling this this complexity in a purely black box manner. Basic saying, okay, the Sonic doesn't care about exactly detail how the conflict being resolved between the bulk sync and data path sync. Because I think basically it means that we, at least on the Sonic side, we didn't think uh, you know uh, enough on all the cases, and we didn't really have any logic to handle those cases. We leave to the each DPU vendors to handle it. However, the risk is being that because this is a tricky things, risk conditions, right? So there will be the testing metrics should be huge, right? So because we don't know how exactly each vendors implement these things, and what are the cases we need to test, right? So I'm pretty sure this is a very complex scenarios, and if it seems if time is not happening right, then we'll lose some flows, you know, at those during the process, and we do not know what flows will be lost, right? So because it's up to the uh, each implementation to decide what their mechanism is going to use. Some use uh, yeah. So I'm not sure. Like I think the approaches we're currently taking is leaving a lot of testing cases, right? Basically treating it as a black box, and each implementation will have its own. I don't know how this kind of complexity be managed.
Yeah, so I think
I don't know
there
that we
is,
have HA even architected or designed, much less test cases, Guohan, yeah.
yeah, so that complexity is also this thing going. I don't know, from my viewpoint is this, right? For example, today when we are in our implementation, at least, right? We, for features, etc. Sometimes there is uh, even using a few more bits in what we pass from stage to stage, etc. That matters quite a bit, right? So just if you get, so there is, we cut down, reduce the size of what is being passed across, etc. And there is it practically makes a huge difference on how you get to that very high numbers that we have, scale numbers and CPS counts, etc. Right? So if you try to, my opinion, just my personal opinion, is if you try to make it into some least common denominator kind of way, then I think we will not be able to get these numbers, right? Because it's not like there is a better implementation or there is a bad implementation, right? Each implementation, depending on how it is implemented, how the details of each flow table, how it is this thing, how the stages are designed internally, right? What you have in the behavioral model is not what is going to get implemented in the hardware potentially, right? It doesn't even need to be, I think, this thing is, it doesn't even need to be P4 kind of a thing, right? If that is the case, if you have to, when we are talking about this cutting edge, this thing where we are actually pushing the box to the limit. I think having this thing where you can do it in a hardware friendly way and you can squeeze the most performance out of the hardware is very advantageous. I think if you don't have it and uh, this thing, it'll affect the performance. Is my personal take. Right? But yeah, it's communities.
Well, I mean,
Because
this,
everyone's may be different, right? The
no,
reality
this,
might be very
no, no,
different.
no. Generally, I agree with the performance, but for this particular case, right? So we're talking about the bulk sync, and we already said the bulk sync doesn't need to be performance, right? So it's not like CPS, right? So this, um, so the bulk sync can be a little bit slower, right? So it doesn't really impact the CPU. So, at this moment, the ASIC, the DPU is still managing all this flow, creating new flows. It just bulk sync a little bit more slower, right? So this part, I think the thing here is more about the correctness. After finish the bulk sync, how do we ensure the active and standby end up in a eventual consistency. We're talking about not you are talking about eventual consistent, meaning that we can afford take more time to get it sync, right? So it just um so that part I still I think I have my but my key point was that that if we don't know how it's done, I don't know how to test it.
Yeah.
And I think in the in reality, if we have this case, in production saying, okay, some flows being lost, I think it's going to be a nightmare for people to debug it.
Yeah, no,
Because
no, yeah.
you don't have the full history of how flows are created, those kind of things. We're talking about millions of flows, right? So making records of all those flows when exactly happen, it's going to be huge. I don't think we are prepared to to log every flow, those kind of things to be able to debug it later, right?
Yeah,
So
and I agree. And
then if we lose some flows, I think who knows what condition is loss of flow, but the customer is going to complain on that. And
exactly, yeah, yeah. So I think this is what we have learned also, I think, even in our experience. And I think that is why I think my intent was to put these, at least enumerate what are the issues that we see, right? So I think any implementation can, if they look at all the issues that are noted here, at least there is a whatever we have learned from our implementation. Now, the exact mechanics of how we do it in our implementation, I think it is very, very implementation specific. I don't know if I can share it here in a meaningful way. How we do it in our pipeline itself, right? This thing. So that is where I've kind of drawn the line and said, okay, we know these are our learnings from our implementation. But exact mechanism of how we do it, what we sync across, it's a little uh, too specific, right? It doesn't harder to abstract it up. But I think we can say possible mechanisms at a very abstract level how it is, but I'm at a loss how else. I mean, because otherwise it has to be very implementation specific. We have to say in this flow, this bit will say that, and things like that. I don't know if we can share that.
Sanjay, regarding to your point about implementation specific, then how do we plan to incorporate this into the behavior model? Because I think at one point we were talking that we do want the behavior to have HA handling as well, right? So if we keep saying this is a vendor implementation specific, then how, I mean, how does that information get into the behavior model?
So the behavior model doesn't need to reflect exactly the it's a behavior. It's a how we this thing the behavior right now. It won't reflect exactly the hardware implementation. No, it will be different.
No, I mean,
it's a software
like
implementation.
No,
what
like
we are
you
saying
mentioned
here
earlier.
is.
But you mentioned earlier, there's many different way of having the eventual consistency, right? Timestamp is one approach, for example, or doing multiple paths. I mean, wouldn't that have an implication of how you're going to put it into the behavior model? Right? And I mean, let alone the interoperability. I mean, I guess we haven't touched that part yet, interoperability.
Yeah, let's not go into interoperability right now. We've covered that
Right.
over and over.
Right.
Yeah, but in terms of the behavior model, I think that's.
Yeah, I think we should pick one of the ways that works in the behavior model. I think we are saying this is the behavior. You have to kind of, if the bulk sync has already happened, then you have to honor what comes from the data path sync. And if it has not yet happened, then you could actually data path sync. That is the behavior that we want.
And drill down into a bit more detail in terms of, especially let's say if you do a timestamp, then what would be the behavior on the receiving side?
Right. So then you would
in terms of comparing timestamp and all, yeah.
Yeah. If it is depending on if it's a newer timestamp, you would accept the flow. If it is an older one, you would kind of But see, I think, but what I was trying to say was, see, this is one way you could, each implementation may have a good way of generating that timestamp at the flow and have enough this thing to kind of imprint it in the data path, right? I mean, there is enough, it is efficient to do that. Some implementations may not have that luxury. They may choose a different way, right? That's what I was trying to get to. But in the behavioral model, yeah, we could put a timestamp, choose one of these, or at least the external behavior, we know how it, what is it that we are expecting. The implementations may choose to do it slightly differently for efficiency reasons.
So how about this, right? So because I still have my question here. Maybe I think I guess we'll work with Presento first, offline and understand a little bit more on those part and see how do we handle, because eventually, right? So this Sonic is going to do that. This bulk sync, and we need to manage this these two channel things carefully.
Correct. Yeah.
So maybe I'll Krishna, let's set up a meeting with Presento, MD, and have an offline discussion on what exactly how the conflict resolves here, right? So I think Yeah.
Definitely.
You know, and
We can do
Excite
that.
Labs has been kind enough to submit their proposal. Pensando AMD has submitted their proposal. Marian wrote this deck. I mean, we've had a lot of different people submitting. We just haven't really landed on, you know, even the basics of what we're talking about, Guohan. We've been doing this since last April, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you know, like, um, I feel like overall, right? So the you know, we reach, we have the agreement how to do it, right? So, and we do have a lot of details, you know,
We do.
you know,
We do.
you know, based on the contribution from the from Sanjay
Yeah.
and team, right? So definitely a lot of detail, but I feel like, um, you know, it's not 100%. The spec is not 100% clear.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of handling those edge cases, which is
Mhm.
you know, probably the most critical things, right? So you need to get these things right, right? So
Yes.
it's not like, yeah. And you know, I understand this is definitely a lot of challenges and a lot of details, right? So,
Mhm.
so at this point, right? So, I think, you know, I will definitely, you know, follow up with, you know, present those separately to understand, you know, how exactly those been done. But meanwhile, I think, you know, for the community members, right? So, you know, anyone has any, you know, suggestions, proposals, because the problem is there, right? So, you know, these two channel things, how to resolve the conflict. I think we're willing to have hear anyone that have any suggestion, you know, concrete proposals to address this, right? Right. So I
And
think
Gohan,
that
these are pretty good here too, if you ever want to read through these too.
yeah. So, you know, any members, if you want to bring forward your proposals on this one, you know, I definitely, you know, open to listen to those and you know, see how we can get converge on those specific problem, right? So I think we're, you know, this you know, made a lot of progress, you know, coming from a generic idea to a very specific proposal now, but we're still missing some details. And you know, it doesn't mean that, you know, anybody, if we can fill those details, you know, have proposals, you know, we should work together um to get the spec clear, right? So
Gohan, this is Chris. I have an idea that people will probably say, "Oh no, more work." But would it is it possible to have a I'll call it lightweight behavioral model of HA synchronization mechanisms in the flow table updates without passing traffic? Just to have like an experimental version to verify algorithms. You know, opening Pandora's box a bit, but at some point, you know,
come again. I mean, what do you mean by this? Oh,
yeah,
you mean like
is it
using the
possible?
BMV tool to do that?
It
Is
doesn't even
that
necessarily have to have a data plane, but it could have all the control mechanisms of HA sync without worrying about the data plane itself. Something that you could use BMV2, I suppose, but to actually test out all the synchronization and algorithms and APIs without having a specific implementation of the data plane itself. And that could be like a scaffolding. I hesitate to say it because I know how much work it is to even have the behavior model itself of the data plane. We're still struggling to complete that. But this is kind of a high stakes thing, right? You know, there's whole books written on how to achieve consistency in databases. And,
oh no. I mean, this is the holy grail, right? So if you
yes,
if you want to ask me, you know, like what is what how important is HA to this project? I mean, it's a holy grail, right? So
yeah,
you know, CPS, you know, of course, you know, but it's a kind of different challenges, right? So, but you know, this correctness, I think, yeah.
The
So
stake in the ground in the industry, though, like if we were able to pull it off, it'd be pretty cool.
yeah,
I mean, there could be almost like a scaffolding of the algorithm that people could agree on. You could almost use that if it was designed a certain way as actual implementation code. But
yeah,
you know, it was highly abstracted. But
yeah.
you know, I
You know,
know
this is
saying
like
there's
a
like a ton of
VM
work.
migration, right? So you know, what the compute does is a VM migration, line migration, right? So this is a similar fashion. I think, you know, a lot of things are very similar to the VM line migration. So
Yeah.
problem.
I just wanted to say it for the record, and people can ride me out of town on a rail if they want, because I know it's a lot of work. But you know, at some point we'll be talking about these specs, and then if we don't have anything we can share, we'll have a super complex spec, and then vendors will say, "Okay, here's my black box. You know, try it out." And there'll be a lot of black boxes we'll be trying out, and it'll be you know, challenging to go one level deeper and look under the hood. So,
Yeah, I don't know how to. I don't know how to exhaust all those edge test cases. You know, if we completely like treat them as a black box, right? So, yeah, that would be testing challenges.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I think, you know, what you said is a very good idea, right? So you know, like a basic version. I think maybe, you know, the you know, especially on this particular things, right? So I think maybe the challenge is that um, you know, there's some ideas, but like we actually don't know how to implement that. You know, implement that correctly. You know, if we're you know, I think your idea is, you know, let's put a basic version out, and then, you know, then iterate on that basic version, right? So, yeah, uh, you know, I think my focus is still, uh, you know, at least from my side, I need to have a clear view of how this would work, right? So, because right now I don't have that kind of understanding how this will work.
Yeah.
And I don't know,
So
you
how
know,
would
I
we,
think, yeah.
how would we make a step forward then? Like, do we need to go find PhD graduate student interns to help us write code, or like how do these things move forward?
Mm,
Or have you guys seen things like this before in different open source projects?
oh, I think, you know, so yeah, so you know, there are two ways, right? So one way is that um, you know, we will try to form a more clear view, you know, those edge cases, and bring up those proposals to the community. You know, a specific proposal, right? So, you know, there's could be multiple different approaches to address this challenge, but we'll try to bring up a specific proposal. And of course, you know, there's other vendors, and if any vendors want to, you know, bring forward their proposals, I think, of course, you know, it's certainly welcome, right? So I think this is a big community. We have a lot of expert here, you know, understand the problem, you know, knows how you know how to solve it. We just need to you know, collaborate a little bit more to get some more information, you know, uh, uh, you know, agreed. Yeah. So I don't think this is rocket science. Yeah. But
another heretical crazy idea is, are we trying to reinvent the wheel, and can we use like replication that's built into Redis?
I think it's maybe it's you know, the Redis is more on the software side. I think the challenging here is that there's 2 channel in sync. So this, I don't know what kind of existing model we have, right? So there's because you know, if there's only 1 channel, then there's no problem, right? So but we kind of have 2 channels for the flows. One goes to the slow pass, one go to the data pass. So these 2 channels need to resolve some kind of conflict, right? So that I don't know, like what kind of you know, I haven't you know, whether there is a existing solution, similar solutions that we can borrow. But we haven't had chance to review the, you know, the proposals from the changes. So sorry about this. I mean, I was checking this.
Sorry, my dog's barking. So it's noon. Should we cut for the day, Guohan, or keep going?
No, I think we need to rise because um, we discussed quite a few on these things, but we do not have a solution, right? So.
Yep. Okay, we'll move it into next week then. And those PRs for the amendments for A and D, just hold them to next week or squash and merge those.
Oh, let's hold to the next week for the
Okay.
HA, right? So you know.
Yeah,
next
okay.
week.
Great, you guys. Yeah, great. Thank you. And thank you, Pensando team, for coming on, and everybody else. I'm gonna stop the recording and post it like normal. And I guess put on your thinking caps for next week and we'll get back together.
Yeah, thanks.
That
Thanks,
sounds
Christina.
good.